Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Of course, the most important updates are coming today from the Kursk direction. I'll remind you one important thing, that yesterday the State Duma, it's the Russian parliament, has ratified the treaty on strategic partnership between Russia and DPRK. The treaty on the comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and the DPRK has been ratified. It is designed to maintain the balance of power and reduce the risk of a nuclear war on the Korean peninsula. It is also include provisions of mutual defense. So this is very important paragraph, mutual defense. And we started this video with this post because today we start receiving a lot of very interesting updates, and the most important is that the first North Korean soldiers have already arrived in the Kursk region, the main intelligence directorate of Ukrainian claims. According to Ukrainian intelligence, the first units of the DPRK military trained and at the training grounds of the Far East have already arrived in the Kursk region by the end of 23rd of October. The training and coordination of DPRK army soldiers who arrived in Russia is allegedly taking place at 5 military training grounds of the Eastern Military District. So this is very important because we have another statement that was made during the BRICS summit by Vladimir Putin, the president of Russian Federation. And I'll remind you that during the BRICS summit, Putin reported that currently 2,000 Ukrainian soldiers are blocked in the northern part of the Sudzha salient. We are talking about this territory. And that was a very big question, at least to me. I was asking myself why the Russians, when they blocked this group of forces, stopped. Why the Russians didn't continue their offensive operation. Why the Russians didn't destroy this, let's say, salient and didn't capture the significant number of Ukrainians, but they decided to wait. And now we understand what exactly the Russians were waiting for. The Russians were waiting for, first of all, the agreement between DPRK and Russia itself, signed and ratified by Russian parliament, and the arrival of the Korean reinforcement. And as I understand, and according to my understanding of the situation, this salient with a significant number of Ukrainian soldiers, remind you 2,000 soldiers, is the first target and the first goal of the Korean forces. This is something like going to be like a training ground in the real fight, with the real war with Ukrainian soldiers. And of course we understand that due to the fact that Ukrainians don't have any connections with the mainland, most likely they would be completely defeated by the Korean forces. And this is exactly the scenario that we're going to see during the next few days. Furthermore, we got report, our source, that pro-Ukrainian sources reports that Russians are preparing a major offensive in the Kursk direction with the creation of cauldrons, semi-cauldrons for the Ukrainian armed forces. Zelensky was informed about this. The Ukrainian armed force attempt to counterattack with the special operation forces in the Kursk region. They achieved minimal results according to many sources. It is now the Russians' turn. I'll remind you that since the beginning of this week, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian forces in the area of Zelený Shlях, trying to restore control over the main supply road, trying to maintain the corridor for evacuation. But as I understand, as we saw according to the videos, most of those attacks were repelled by the Russians. The Ukrainians suffered the significant losses and were forced to fall back. And the most important, the Ukrainians haven't managed to unblock the forces in this artillery and this basically a cauldron. So as it was written in this post, we are waiting for additional step, and now it's the Russian turns. Most likely this offensive is going to start maybe tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Now let's move further and let's talk about other directions. And we are going to the Chasiv Yar and to the Toretsk agglomeration. We continue adjustments of map in Ukrainian favor in Zabalka district. Today different neutral mappers have adjusted their map in Ukrainian favor, or at least in favor of the gray zone. So let's discuss this from the beginning. For example, this is the situation on the 22nd of October, and in the beginning of October there were several geolocations that confirmed the Russian presence in the most part of Zabalka district. But starting of the 22nd of October, most of the mappers began changing the map in Ukrainian favor. This is the situation on the ground on the 24th of October, so yesterday, and this is the situation on the ground by the beginning of the 25th. Maybe the Ukrainians conducted several counterattacks. Maybe the Russians didn't control this territory at all. So we don't know for sure, but we are adjusting the map as well as most of the mappers. We are following the situation. Obviously, maybe something interesting is happening here right now. Now let's move a little bit further in the western direction. The Russians continue moving along the railways and along the river of Kryvyi Terets. And according to neutral mappers, the Russians managed to take under control the first streets in the southern part of the village by the name of Sherbakovka. Now let's move further, and we are coming to the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians continue or finishing their clashes for the mine of Novohrodivka III. I'll remind you that since the beginning of this week there were very heavy clashes between the Ukrainian and the Russian forces. The Ukrainians were sending the significant number of forces, reinforcements, to stabilize the situation and to force the Russians to fall back. The Russians from their side were sending the significant number of infantry and assault troopers. Very heavy clashes. Both sides suffered the significant losses, both either the Russians and the Ukrainians. Several times the Ukrainians were ambushed during the redeployment of reinforcement because they were caught in cauldron and the supply roads were under complete Russian fire control. And today we got the geolocation that was published basically in the most northern part of the industrial zone of the mine. In this video we can see the Russian soldier who was burning the mine in his hands, and the Russian soldier dropped the mine on the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine that blocked themselves in the basements and under the ground in the area of the Novohrodivka mine of Novohrodivka III. As a result of this attack, the mine was destroyed. There was a very heavy explosion, and most likely the Ukrainian positions were buried under the ruins. So this is the situation. Based on this final episode of battle for Novohrodivka III, we have adjusted the map in Russian favor. Obviously, during the next few days we will adjust the rest of the landfill in Russian favor, and then the Russians will begin moving further in the direction of Mirnograd. So these are the changes on the ground for the previous 24 hours. This is the situation. Yesterday was very heavy clashes, and today we see that the Russians finished the battle, and the battle was finished in Russian favor. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the city of Selydove. We continue receiving additional changes on the ground. Very interesting things are happening in the northern part. Today the sources reported that the armored forces of the Russian Federation entrenched themselves in part of the high-rise buildings of the 11th quarter in the south, east and the center of the city. So the Russians managed to break through the final Ukrainian defense belt, and the sources are saying that the Russians attacked this 11th district of the city of Selydove from the south. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that according to some sources, the Russians managed to attack and to enter the city of Selydove using these roads of attack. And if this information is correct, the Russians managed to block the Ukrainians in the northern part, in the central part completely, and created another cauldron. We're not talking about thousands of Ukrainians that were caught in cauldron, but obviously a few hundreds, maybe up to 1 battalion stuck in this 11th district, and they have no chances for evacuation, no chances to escape the complete encirclement. And furthermore, we have changes on the ground. Let's compare the map. This is the situation at the beginning of the 25th of October. This is the situation on the end of the 24th. As you can see, the Russians managed to capture up to 30% of the southern part of Selydove. Furthermore, the Russians managed to take under control up to 10% of the northern part of Selydove. The Ukrainians control currently around 30%, around 10% is in the gray zone. The situation for the Ukrainians is very critical. We have the Russian drones that are flying above the territory, making videos, trying to discover the Ukrainian positions. We see that the Ukrainians can't show any resistance, and most likely the battle for Selydove will be finished during the next few days. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Hirnyk, Kurakhove. There is a real operational crisis in this area. The Russians managed to defeat several brigades and several battalions and several probably companies in the territory of this agglomeration. Some of the some of the units of the armored forces of Ukraine abandoned their positions, and that's allowed the Russians to encircle several more battalions in this area. Let's discuss in details. The sources are saying that Ukraine armed forces abandoned their positions in Hirnyk and allowed their neighbors to be surrounded. Ukrainian publics report that Russian troopers were able to quickly advance in Hirnyk due to the fact of that some of the Ukraine armed forces units abandoned their positions there. Relatives of the Ukrainian armed forces are writing in Massia and in open source that 210 separate battalion of the 120th Brigade was operationally surrounded due to the neighboring 154th Battalion abandoning its positions. I'll remind you that just yesterday some sources reported that the Russians began attack towards the coal mine by the number 42. So this territory was attacked by the Russians, and maybe this is exactly what these posts are talking about. Most likely the Russians managed to break the Ukrainian defense belt and to force the Ukrainians to fall back from the mine number 42, and this attack allowed the Russians to improve their positions significantly, as you can see, and basically to encircle those Ukrainians who were still located on the territory of the town by the name of Hirnyk. From this moment, the Ukrainians have no chances for evacuation because the roads and the main supply roads are under complete Russian fire control. Now let's move further and let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. We have a lot of FPV drone attacks, and mainly the Russians were targeting and destroying Ukrainian vehicles that were moving along the main supply roads between Bagayavlenka itself and the city of Kurakhove. Lots of vehicles were destroyed. The Russians are preparing the foothold before the further offensive operation with the purpose to break the Ukrainian defense belt completely, to defeat them and to force them to run as far as possible. This is the situation in this direction. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.